At 9:47 on a Tuesday morning in October, a 90-pound Belgian Malinois broke from his handler's grip, crossed 14 feet of polished concrete floor, and bowed. Not a sit, not a downstay. A full ceremonial bow, front paws extended wide, chest dropped to within an inch of the floor, head inclined at a precise 30-degree angle, the rest of his body still and perfect as a carved figure. In the military working dog program, trainers called it the honor salute. It was not in any standard manual. It was not something dogs simply did. The woman it bowed to was standing behind the counter with a portafilter in her hand. She did not drop it. She looked down at the dog with an expression that no one in the room could quite read, something that moved between grief and warmth, recognition and restraint. She set the portafilter down. She came around the counter in 4 steps. She knelt on the cold concrete floor, took the dog's face in both hands, and said something very quietly that no one else heard. The dog's tail moved. Once. In the 20 seconds that followed, no one in Altitude Brews made a sound. Not the 2 soldiers in the doorway, not the dozen customers frozen with cups halfway to their mouths, not the woman in the camel hair coat who, 30 seconds earlier, had been shouting. Especially not her. 47 minutes before that moment, Zoe Chun unlocked the back door of Altitude Brews at 8:53 a.m. and started the espresso machine the way she started everything, without fuss, without announcement, and without requiring anyone to notice. Ridgecrest, Colorado was the kind of small mountain town that survived on 3 things: ski season money, summer tourist traffic, and the steady rotation of military families from Fort Carson, 30 miles south, who had learned quickly where the best coffee was. Altitude Brews occupied the corner of Main and Cascade in a building that had been a mining assay office in 1887 and still had the original timber beams across the ceiling, dark and honey-colored and grooved with a century of seasons. Danny Ortiz had bought it 6 years ago, gutted it carefully, and built something that felt like the mountains themselves. Warm wood, cold stone, the smell of good coffee so deep in the walls it might have been structural. Zoe had worked there for 8 months. She had walked in one morning with a 1-page resume that listed almost nothing, a gap of 6 years described simply as military service, honorably discharged. And Danny had looked at her for a long moment, and then said, "Can you start Thursday?" He had asked her, once, a few weeks in, what kind of service. She had smiled and said, "The kind that doesn't make good small talk." He'd never asked again. What Danny did know, in the way that attentive people always eventually know things, was that Zoe Chun was not ordinary. It wasn't the way she made coffee, though she made it with the precision of someone who understood that the difference between 30 and 32 seconds on an extraction was not a preference, but a fact. It wasn't the way she handled difficult customers, though she did that better than anyone he'd ever employed, with a quality of calm that somehow made people feel their own anger was slightly embarrassing, like finding you've been shouting in a library. It was smaller and larger than any of that. It was the way she moved through a room with the economy of someone for whom space had always mattered. It was the way she always sat with her back to the wall on her breaks. It was the way, at 9:02 that morning, when the gas line behind the back burner hissed and sparked and Lily Park screamed and knocked over a sugar container trying to back away, Zoe was already there, shutting off the gas valve with one hand and placing herself precisely between Lily and the source of the problem. Not because she'd calculated the geometry, but because her body had already decided. "It's fine," she said. Not loudly. She didn't need to be loud. Line pressure, not a leak. Give it 30 seconds. She waited. The hissing stopped. "How did you even know where the valve was?" Lily said, pressing her hand against her sternum. "I know where all the valves are," Zoe said, and returned to the espresso machine. Lily Park was 24 years old and 6 months into her first real job, and she had been watching Zoe Chun the way you watch someone who makes no sense and makes complete sense at the same time. Zoe was the smallest person Lily had ever seen handle a difficult customer and come out the other side with the customer somehow apologizing. She was the only person Lily knew who could carry 5 large drinks in 2 hands, without a tray, and never spill. She was quietly, drilly funny, the kind of funny that crept up on you sideways, and she seemed to carry something inside her that had no name, a weight and a weightlessness at once, like something very settled that had taken a very long time to settle. Lily had, privately, decided that Zoe was some kind of retired operative, She had told no one this theory because it sounded insane. By 9:15, the morning rush was properly underway. By 9:30, the line stretched to the door. Zoe moved behind the bar like water moving over stone, without friction, without waste, calling drink names before the machine finished them, catching Lily's misreads gently before they became errors, and doing all of it with the patient, present quality of someone for whom this was not beneath them. This was simply where they were, and where they were was enough. At 9:34, the front door opened, and the bell above it rang, and a woman walked in who would, before the morning was over, define the worst decision of her year. Lily clocked her in the first 3 seconds. It wasn't the camel hair coat, though the coat helped. It wasn't the large leather handbag that probably cost more than Lily's monthly rent. It was the way she walked in, not through the door but at it, as if the door was obligated to have opened sooner, as if the room owed her a certain arrangement of itself. Behind her came a teenage boy, maybe 16, with headphones around his neck and the specific expression of someone who had learned that the optimal survival strategy was invisibility. He was tall and dark-haired, and he held the door open for the person behind his mother because he had, apparently, decided on some private principle to be a better person than the situation required. Lily noted, through the window, the handicap parking placard on the dashboard of the white Range Rover. Karen Whitfield did not appear to have a mobility impairment. There were 7 people in line. Karen walked to the front of it. "Excuse me," said the man she'd stepped past, mid-50s, salt and pepper beard, patient expression that was actively eroding. "I'll just be a second," Karen said, in the tone of someone who believed that the brevity of one's intentions counted as a form of courtesy. The man looked at the 6 people behind him, made the calculation most people make in these situations, and stepped aside. His name, as it happened, was not relevant to Karen Whitfield, which was the nature of the problem, but it was relevant to this story. He was a retired schoolteacher named Gerald who had driven 40 minutes from Cannon City for a dentist appointment and had wanted a decent coffee first, and he stepped aside because he was tired and because it wasn't worth it. And he spent the next 6 minutes watching what happened with an expression that moved from resigned to fascinated. Karen arrived at the counter. Lily stepped forward with her professional smile fully deployed. "Hi. Welcome to Altitude. What can I get you today?" "Vanilla latte," Karen said, phone already up and scrolling. "Grande size, oat milk, 2 extra shots, sugar-free vanilla, extra hot." And actually hot, because the last time. She glanced up briefly, locating Lily as a person in the same way you locate furniture. It was barely warm. "Of course," Lily said, already typing. "Just confirming. Oat milk vanilla latte, 2 extra shots, sugar-free, extra hot." "Yes, I just said that." "Absolutely. Name for the order?" "Karen." Lily finished the entry. Behind Karen, her son Trevor had arrived at the counter. He looked at Lily with an expression that contained, Lily thought, an entire silent apology. "Medium drip, please," he said. "Black." "Coming right up," Lily said, with genuine warmth. Zoe made the drink. She made it exactly as specified. Oat milk frothed to 140 degrees, the additional shots pulled clean, the sugar-free vanilla measured rather than guessed. She slid it across the pickup counter at 9:41. Karen picked it up without looking at the person who had handed it to her. She sipped. She set it down. "This isn't what I ordered." Zoe looked at the cup. She looked at Karen. Her expression did not change. "Grande oat milk vanilla latte, 2 extra shots, sugar-free, extra hot," she said. "That's what's in the cup." "I said skim milk," Karen said. "I never said oat milk. I never drink oat milk." A small pause formed in the air between them. "Your order as entered was oat milk," Lily said, carefully, turning the screen slightly. My colleague confirmed before she started the drink. "I didn't say oat milk." "Of course," Zoe said, and without argument, without any visible irritation, with the same focused attention she gave every task, she started the remake. Karen watched her. The absence of reaction seemed, somehow, to irritate her more than a reaction would have, as though she had been prepared for resistance and found only a kind of unassailable calm, and calm was harder to argue with than anger. The second drink was ready in 4 minutes. Zoe slid it across. Karen sipped it. Something moved through her face, a brief, quickly suppressed expression of satisfaction. The drink was clearly right. The drink was exactly what she wanted. She set it down. There's too much vanilla. In the queue, someone made a sound. Not loud enough to be actionable. Loud enough. Trevor Whitfield looked at the ceiling with the expression of someone who has had this exact experience before and has developed, through repeated exposure, a refined dissociative response. At some point in the third exchange, Karen had picked up her phone and begun filming. Lily noticed it and felt her stomach tighten in the specific way of someone recognizing bad weather in a changing sky. The shift of weight onto the back foot, the phone angle that was slightly too high and slightly too deliberate, the transition from irritated customer to performing irritated customer. Once that shift happened, Lily knew from experience, the math changed. You were no longer dealing with someone who wanted a solution. You were dealing with someone who wanted a document. I have been coming to coffee shops for 20 years, Karen said, at a volume calibrated precisely to the nearest 3 tables. And in 20 years, I have never had a barista make my drink wrong 3 separate times. We've made it twice, Zoe said. The second time was made to your revised specification. Are you correcting me right now? I'm providing accurate information. At the corner table by the window, Elena Vasquez, 35, freelance, core to do every Tuesday without variation, had her own phone propped lightly against her coffee cup, facing the counter. She wasn't pointing it aggressively. She wasn't announcing it. She was a journalist and she recognized a story the same way a doctor recognizes symptoms, not by choice, but by training. I want to speak to the manager, Karen said. Danny came through from the back, wiping his hands on a cloth, with the unhurried quality of someone who had run his own business long enough to recognize exactly what kind of conversation he was walking into. He gave Karen the full benefit of his attention without giving her anything else. What can I help you with? Karen's explanation took 3 minutes and covered the drink, the attitude, a previous visit she attributed to Zoe that Lily was almost certain had happened on a day Zoe wasn't working, and the general incompetence she perceived in the current staffing situation. It built, with the momentum of a speech that had been rehearsing itself in her head since before she'd arrived, to a conclusion she had clearly reached in advance. I think she should be let go, Karen said, with the even confidence of someone who had said similar things before and found that they worked. She is clearly undertrained, and she has no business being customer-facing. My staff are exceptional, Danny said. His voice held no particular heat. He was not performing calm. He simply was calm, in the way of someone who had decided long ago not to spend energy on things that didn't require it. Is there something I can do to make your experience right today? I want her. I can offer you a replacement drink or a full refund, Danny said. Those are the available options. Karen stared at him. People accustomed to certain kinds of influence frequently lacked a working script for no delivered without apology. This is unacceptable, she said. I understand you feel that way. I'll be leaving a review. That's absolutely your right. Karen turned back to the counter. Back to Zoe. Something had been building in her since she'd walked in. A pressure with its own private origins that had nothing to do with Ridgecrest, nothing to do with coffee, possibly nothing to do with anything in this room. And it had been looking for somewhere to discharge from the moment she walked through the door. And here was somewhere. And here was someone. And someone was small and quiet, and wearing a green apron, and still looking at her with that expression that was impossible to crack. You, Karen said. Phone raised. Voice ascending. I want you to know that people like you, with this attitude, this whole smug little, she searched, found, deployed the word she'd been loading, incompetence, are exactly what is wrong with the service industry in this country. You're what, 20? 23? You are a child. And the fact that you are standing there looking at me instead of apologizing tells me everything I need to know about how you were raised. Lily opened her mouth. Don't, Karen said, still not looking at her. One syllable, dropped like a door slamming. Lily's mouth closed. Zoe had not moved. She stood with both hands resting lightly on the counter, her posture easy, her expression clear as a winter morning. She was watching Karen the way she watched everything, with her full attention and with none of herself in it. Just observation. Just presence. Ma'am, Zoe said. 2 syllables. Perfectly level. Karen stopped. I hear you, Zoe said. The room exhaled without breathing. Karen's phone was still raised. Still recording. On Elena's phone, propped at its angle, the frame contained Karen's face in the foreground and Zoe's quiet stillness behind the counter, and the contrast between them was the kind of thing that needed no caption. "Oh, you hear me," Karen said, and her voice climbed again, shaking now with something that had passed through anger and come out the other side as something uglier and more desperate. "That's all you have? I want an apology. I want a manager to act like this matters, and all you have is I hear you?" She shook her head. The words were already forming, had probably been formed since before she'd said anything else, loaded and ready. "You're just a stupid kid. You're just a stupid, entitled little." She said it. Shut the F***ck up. In the back corner, Trevor Whitfield took his headphones fully off and held them in his hands. The coffee shop was very quiet. From outside, on the street, the sound of a vehicle parking. Doors. 2 sets of footsteps on the sidewalk. A dog's nails on concrete. Then the bell above the front door rang. The 2 men who walked in were dressed in civilian clothes. Jeans, jackets, good boots. But civilian, the way a translation is the original language, recognizable as describing the thing without being the thing. The jackets fit across the shoulders in a specific way that had nothing to do with fashion. The boots were broken in without being worn down. They moved through the door and into the room with the fluid spatial awareness of people who were always, without deciding to be, accounting for exits. The younger one was in his early 30s, lean, dark, with a jaw like a load-bearing wall and eyes that did the same room sweep Lily had seen Zoe do 100 times, but faster. The older one was in his 50s, silver at his temples, and had the bearing of someone for whom stillness and authority had long ago become the same thing. The younger man had a dog, a Belgian Malinois on a short tactical lead, 90 pounds of precision and voltage, built like a sentence with no unnecessary words. He wore a working vest with a unit patch Lily didn't recognize, and he moved the way very trained things move. Every action intentional, every step accounted for. Military dogs came through Ridgecrest regularly, and Lily had seen a dozen of them. This one was different in a way she couldn't immediately quantify. It felt like it was thinking. The dog stopped. Not a hesitation. A stop. Full weight settling back on the haunches, nose lifting, working the air with the focused, meticulous attention of an instrument calibrated for exactly this purpose. His whole body began to orient toward the counter in a slow, certain movement, the way a compass needle finds north. Not a choice, not a decision, a certainty. A low sound came from his chest. Not a growl. Something closer to a vowel. "Rex. Heel." The younger handler's voice was practiced, automatic, confident. Rex did not heel. His nose moved again. His orientation toward the counter became total, head forward, ears pitched, the rest of the room effectively ceasing to exist for him. The lead pulled taut. The younger handler braced. Then Rex stepped sideways, dipped one shoulder smoothly, and was free. "Rex." The handler's voice had changed, stripped of its confidence and replaced with something genuinely uncertain, the tone of a man watching his most reliable instrument do something that wasn't in the instrument's manual. Rex crossed the room. He did not run. He walked, with direction, with purpose, with an economy of movement that somehow conveyed more urgency than running would have. 14 feet of polished concrete, past 3 tables and 2 chairs, past Gerald with his forgotten coffee, past Elena's propped phone, directly to the service counter of Altitude Brews. He stopped in front of Zoe Chun. He looked up at her. For 1 second, possibly 2, he simply looked at her. And she looked back. And something passed between them that was not trick and was not training, but was the specific, irreplaceable recognition of 2 living things that had been, at some point that mattered enormously, in extreme circumstances together. Then Rex lowered his front paws to the floor. He spread them wide. He dropped his chest. He inclined his great head at a precise angle that was unmistakably, incontrovertibly intentional. Not a playbow, not a stretch, not a behavior that could be explained as accidental. It was deliberate the way a word is deliberate. It was a gesture with a specific grammar, made by someone who knew that grammar perfectly. The honor salute. The silence that followed was the particular silence of a room in which everyone has simultaneously realized they are witnessing something they do not have the context to understand, but that their bodies have already registered as significant. Karen Whitfield's phone was still raised. It was still recording. It was now recording the dog. Her face, behind the raised phone, had gone through several changes in rapid succession and had arrived at an expression that had no category in her usual repertoire. She was not angry, not entitled, not performing. She was simply confused, genuinely, thoroughly, in a way that had temporarily suspended everything else. Zoe looked at Rex for 3 full seconds. Something moved across her face, the specific compound expression of someone seeing a thing that they are glad to see and also that costs them something to see, warmth and tightening occurring simultaneously in the same small muscles. She set the portafilter down on the counter with a sound that was quiet and very final. She came around the counter. She knelt on the cold concrete floor. She took Rex's face in both hands, both small hands, the hands of someone who was 5'2" and 27 years old and wearing a green coffee shop apron. And Rex pressed his head into them with the absolute trust of an animal that knew, with the complete certainty of an animal that has never had reason to doubt this particular knowledge, exactly who it was with. Zoe said something. She said it quietly enough that the nearest table, straining, caught nothing, not a syllable, not an intonation, just the shape of words being said. Rex's tail moved. One slow, certain arc. For 20 seconds, nobody in altitude brews made a sound. Then, from the doorway, the younger handler's voice, stripped of everything except a stripped-down, genuine thing underneath, Sergeant Chun. Zoe looked up. The handler was standing 4 feet away, and he looked like someone who has just watched something classified as impossible occur in front of him and found out the classification was wrong. His eyes were bright. His jaw was working against something. He had the look of a man trying to remain professional in circumstances that were not professionally designed. Corporal Webb, Zoe said. Then, reading something in his expression, or has that changed? Sergeant, he said. Sergeant Webb. 8 months ago. He paused. He looked at her the way you look at someone you have thought about often and not seen in a long time, checking memory against reality. The recommendation you wrote for the boards, I know what it said. You earned the promotion, Zoe said. I just described what was already there. He shook his head, slightly, as though arguing with her privately about this was a conversation he'd already had many times and still hadn't won. The older man had come fully through the doorway now. He removed his sunglasses. He looked at Zoe with the expression of someone for whom an enormous amount of information was arriving in a very small window of time. The coffee shop, the green apron, the woman kneeling on the floor with her hands on a dog that, by every behavioral protocol, should not have done what it just did. Captain Drake, Zoe said. Sergeant Chun. He took a breath. He reached up and removed his cap, a gesture from an older vocabulary, a language of respect that was older than any branch of service, and held it at his side without embarrassment. You look good. You're a terrible liar, sir. The suppressed laugh that moved through his face was quick and genuine and quickly mastered. Heard you were in Ridgecrest. Small world. Came in for coffee. He glanced at Karen. He glanced back at Zoe. His expression settled into something measured and deliberate, the expression of a man who has decided to say something and is choosing his words with the care they require. Walked in at an interesting moment. Elena Vasquez had her phone fully up now, not hidden, not apologetic. She was recording with the stillness of a person who understands that her job right now is to be invisible and accurate, that the most important thing she can do for this story is not interfere with it. Karen Whitfield had lowered her own phone by increments. First the angle, then the conviction, then the understanding that the story she had been composing with it for the past 10 minutes was no longer the story happening in the room. She looked at the 2 soldiers. She looked at the dog. She looked at the small woman in the green apron, who had stood now and had one hand still resting on Rex's flank with the ease of long familiarity, and who was looking at the room with the same quality of quiet attentiveness she had maintained through the entire morning. I don't understand, Karen said. It was the most unguarded sentence she'd produced since walking in. She wasn't performing it. She genuinely didn't understand. Captain Drake looked at her. He was the kind of man who had briefed generals and written after-action reports in active hostile environments. And when he chose to use his full voice, it had the quality of something that had been load-tested. The honor salute, he said, is a gesture that exists in exactly one MWD training program in the United States military. It is not in any standard manual. It was developed by one trainer, 8 years ago, as a high-value recognition signal, a way for dogs with the highest operational clearance to identify their primary trainer across distance, across noise, across conditions that would compromise any other signal. He glanced at Rex, who had moved to sit precisely beside Zoe's left leg with the settled placement of something returning to its correct position. Rex has been in service for 6 years. He has completed 4 overseas deployments. He has been directly responsible, that we can document, for the protection of 31 American service members. He paused. The numbers settled in the room. Rex performs that salute for one person. The silence was the kind that asks a question. Sergeant Webb answered it. He was looking at Karen Whitfield, and his expression was not unkind, and it was not kind either. It was simply honest, in the way of someone who had decided that the truth of this particular moment was worth the cost of saying it clearly. Sergeant Zoe Chun was the lead trainer at 10th Special Forces Group's military working dog program from age 20 to age 26. She trained 19 dogs, including Rex. She deployed with 3 of them. He glanced at Zoe, who was looking at the floor with the expression of someone quietly enduring something they have never enjoyed and have never asked for. She received the Legion of Merit at 24. A pause. For actions in Kunar province that I'm not authorized to fully describe. I am, Drake said. He said it without loudness. He said it the way men say things they have thought about whether to say and have decided, for specific reasons, to say. 2021, Kunar province, Eastern Afghanistan. Sergeant Chun and Rex were attached to a 12-man team on a compound clearance operation. The team walked into a prepared ambush. The primary extraction route was compromised within the first 4 minutes. There were 5 wounded, 2 of them critical. He stopped. He seemed to be deciding something about the appropriate level of detail for a coffee shop in Colorado. She didn't leave the compound until every wounded member of that team was out. Rex located 3 IEDs on the improvised extraction route. 2 of them. He looked at Zoe, who was still looking at the floor. She cleared herself. Under fire. He put his cap back on. She was 23 years old. The coffee shop held the sentence the way a room holds a sound after the sound has stopped, the silence shaped by what had been in it. Trevor Whitfield, in his chair against the wall, had gone very still. His headphones were in his hands. He was looking at Zoe Chun with an expression that Lily Park, watching, would think about for weeks afterward. Not theatrical awe, not the performed shock of someone watching something staged, but the real, startled, slightly stricken expression of someone whose understanding of a specific thing, and then of many connected things, and then of something larger than any of them, had been quietly, permanently rearranged. Karen's phone was at her side. Karen was looking at Zoe. Whatever she had been about to say next, the review, the escalation, the manager's email, the husband's lawyer, was somewhere very far behind her, on the other side of something she could not now uncross. She chose to separate at 26, Marcus said, quieter now. That was her right. She'd earned it 6 times over. He looked at the green apron, at the portafilter on the counter, at the small coffee shop in the mountain town. He seemed, briefly, to be working through something of his own. I don't know why he stopped himself. I like coffee, Zoe said. She said it with complete, undefended simplicity, for words carrying no apology and no performance, with the ease of a person who had long ago stopped needing anyone to understand her choices. The room sat with that for a moment. Is that okay? She said. Marcus looked at her for a long moment. Something in his face, the tension of the last 10 minutes, the professional mask, something older and more complicated that he'd clearly carried in. Let go, partially. Yes, ma'am, he said. That's okay. The bell rang again. Sheriff Dave Kowalski was 58 years old, 215 pounds, 22 years in Fremont County law enforcement, and 10 before that in the 82nd Airborne. He had received a noise complaint about a disturbance at Altitude Brews, filed through the non-emergency line 30 minutes prior. He'd taken his time because he trusted Danny Ortiz, and because the morning had been long, and because the complaints that came from establishments Danny ran tended to resolve themselves before anyone official arrived. He pushed through the door. He did the room sweep that was automatic and eternal. He registered. 2 soldiers, military working dog, full coffee shop of very still customers. 1 woman in a camel hair coat, standing in the middle of the floor with the expression of someone who had recently undergone an involuntary transformation of perspective. His eyes reached the counter. He went still. Is that, he said, quietly, to no one in particular, Zoe Chun? From behind the counter, Danny said, Morning, Dave. Kowalski walked to the counter with the measured pace of someone recalibrating. He stood in front of Zoe, who had finished with Rex's harness and was standing with both hands back on the counter, watching him with a mild expression that contained, behind its mildness, entire unmapped territories. "Zoe Chun," he said. "From 10th Group. Morning, Sheriff. I served with Bill Reardon. 3rd Battalion, 09 to 14. Bill's good people. He told me." Kowalski stopped. He was performing the calculation of what was appropriate to say in a coffee shop in front of a room full of people who were not pretending to look at anything else. He settled on the version that was true without being more than the moment required. "He's told me what happened in Cunor. For years he's been telling that story. Every time he does," he paused, "nobody believes him. Because it doesn't seem like the kind of thing one person can do." "Bill kept the team calm," Zoe said. "I had Rex." "Don't do that," Kowalski said, not unkindly. She almost smiled. He looked at her for another moment, with the look of a man who is settling something in himself, a long-held account being closed properly, and then he turned and looked across the room at Karen Whitfield. Karen had been watching all of this. She had been watching the entire unfolding of the past 30 minutes. The soldiers' faces, the sheriff's face, Drake's voice, the number 31, the word 23, and she had also been watching her son, who had found a chair near the wall and was sitting in it with his elbows on his knees and his eyes on the middle distance, working through something privately that she couldn't see and didn't know how to ask about. She had been watching the customers, too. Elena's phone, the man with the salt and pepper beard who was watching her with an expression she couldn't quite categorize, the other people who were no longer looking at their screens but at her, with an expression that was not cruelty but was its own kind of verdict. She had the particular look of someone who has been, for the past half hour, in the process of crossing from one understanding of a situation to another and has arrived, unexpectedly, at a place she did not plan for and cannot now leave. She stopped. "I didn't know," she said. The sentence came out smaller than she'd intended. Thinner. It contained less than she'd meant it to contain and more than she'd meant to give away. Zoe looked at her. The same quality of attention she gave everything, complete, patient, present, without cruelty and without softness. She held Karen's eyes the way she held every hard thing, directly, without flinching, without the performance of holding it. "I know you didn't know," Zoe said. Karen made a small gesture with her hand, something between explanation and apology. "If I had known." "Ma'am." The word was not a rebuke. It was a marker, a boundary, precisely placed. "I know you didn't know." That's exactly the problem. The room heard it. The room went quiet in the specific way of a room that has received something it recognizes as important. "The person who makes your coffee might be anyone," Zoe continued. Her voice was level and even and had the quality of something that had been thought about, not performed, something said because it was true, not because there was an audience. A 20-year veteran. A person who rebuilt their life from a place most people wouldn't survive. A parent working 3 jobs to keep a family together. A kid saving for school. A person having the worst year of their life who is still showing up and still trying. She held Karen's eyes through all of it. "It doesn't matter. The point isn't that I have a particular story that earns your respect. The point is that you decided I didn't deserve it before you knew any story at all." It was not a speech. It was 10 sentences, delivered at the same volume she'd maintained through the entire morning, and it landed with the specific, quiet devastation of something precisely aimed at something real. In his chair against the wall, Trevor Whitfield put his face in his hands. Not crying. Just resting there, in the posture of someone who is processing a weight that has arrived from several directions at once. Karen was very still. When she moved, it was to Danny. "I'd like to pay for my order," she said. Her voice was under control. "And I apologize for the disruption to your business." Danny looked at her with the unhurried patience that was his default register. "The coffee is on the house. I'd ask you to give it some time before coming back in." The phrase "give it some time" did the work that "you're not welcome here" would have done without requiring anyone to say the harder words. It was the particular efficiency of someone who'd run a business long enough to know that some doors could be closed without being slammed. Karen nodded. She picked up her bag. She looked, briefly and directly, at Zoe. She opened her mouth. "You don't need to," Zoe said, before anything came out. Not harshly, with the simple, final quality of someone who meant it literally. "I don't need it." It was not cruelty. It was the kindest possible way to say, "This is over, And what you give me now is for you, not for me. And I have already moved on. Karen walked to the door. She stopped just outside the frame and looked back, and she looked at her son. Trevor was already walking toward the counter. He was 16, and up close he had the look of someone who had made a decision that was costing him something and had decided the cost was worth it. He stood in front of Zoe Chun, and he did not look at his feet. "I'm sorry," he said. His voice was steady. "For what she said, and for what I didn't say." He swallowed. "I should have said something earlier." Zoe looked at him for a moment. She looked at him the way she looked at everything, fully, without flinching, without the shortcuts that adults took with teenagers. "You said something now," she said. "That's not nothing." He nodded once. Something in his face found a direction. "Thank you," he said. "For all of it. The things they said you did. Take care of yourself, Trevor." He almost smiled. It was the surprise of being known that did it. "You know my name?" "You ordered a black coffee," she said. "I pay attention." He walked to the door. His mother was outside, standing beside the Range Rover with the particular posture of someone who is waiting for something that doesn't have a clear shape yet. Lily watched through the window as Trevor came out, and as Karen looked at her son, and as something that was not comfortable and was not resolved but was at least honest passed between them like weather. Then Elena Vasquez set her phone down on the table, face up, and looked at it. She looked at what she'd recorded. She looked at the counter, where Zoe had picked up the portafilter again and was running the next shot with the same focused attention she had given the first shot of the morning. She picked her phone back up. She started typing a caption. By 2 p.m., the video had 40,000 views. By 6 p.m., it had passed 1 million. By 9 p.m., it was on 3 national news websites, and the number had stopped being a number and had become a thing that people said in tones usually reserved for weather events. Elena had posted it with a single sentence of caption, just a Tuesday at Altitude Brews, and a location tag, and she had not editorialized it, had not added emphasis, had let the footage do what the footage did on its own, unfold in real time, layer by layer, Rex's bow as the pivot that stopped the scroll, and everything after it as the reason nobody scrolled away. The military community found it first, the way the military community found things, through networks that were informal and fast, and deeply cross-referenced. Within 3 hours, the veteran Facebook groups and Reddit threads and Discord servers of half a dozen branches had circulated it, and with each share came context. People who recognized Rex's unit patch, people who had trained alongside Marcus Webb, 2 people who wrote, with the particular careful vagueness of those who understood classification, that they had served near Sergeant Chun in the field, and that the parts of the story Drake had told in the coffee shop were, if anything, abbreviated. One post, from an anonymous account, said only, "If you know, you know. Sergeant Chun is the real deal. Leave her alone and let her have her coffee shop." This post had 14,000 likes by midnight. Leave her alone was not an instruction the internet followed, but it was an instruction that said something true. At 7:23 p.m., the phone at Altitude Brews rang with a different kind of call. Danny picked it up and heard a man's voice, clipped, accustomed to outcomes, with the compressed energy of someone who had decided, somewhere between his lawyer's voicemail and this call, on a specific strategy. "My wife was filmed in your establishment today without her consent, and I intend to pursue." "One moment," Danny said. He carried the phone to the back room, where Zoe was running the end-of-day cleaning cycle on the espresso machine with the careful, methodical attention she gave every closing task. He held the phone out. "A Mr. Whitfield," Danny said, "who I believe may not have thought this all the way through." Zoe took the phone. She listened for 6 seconds while the voice continued its introduction and the outline of its intended argument. She said, "Sir, the recording was made in a public commercial establishment. Your wife's behavior is captured in full sequence. I'd recommend consulting your attorney before taking any further steps." A pause. "And then I'd recommend speaking with your son." She handed the phone back to Danny. Danny put it to his ear. The line held silence for 4 seconds. Then a click. Captain Drake, who had stayed through the afternoon in his corner with a book he hadn't opened and 2 cups of coffee that had been refilled without his asking, looked across the room. He raised an eyebrow. "Short," he said. "He's not an idiot," Zoe said. "Just not accustomed to thinking past the opening move." Drake turned an unread page. "There are 3 reporters outside." "I know. You could." "No." He turned another unread page. "News cycle moves on in about 4 days. 3, Zoe said. Something in his face acknowledged that she was probably right. He left at 8:15, stopping at the counter on the way out. He stood there for a moment, in the way of someone who has something to say and is choosing the right version of it. You made something out in those mountains, he said finally. Something that has kept people alive that would not otherwise be alive. He put his cap on. I hope this life you've chosen is the right one for you. It is, Zoe said. He nodded. He went to the door. He stopped with his hand on the frame. Without turning, Rex is going to keep looking for you every time we go somewhere with good coffee. Tell him I'll be here, Zoe said. Drake walked out. At 8:45, the last customer gone. Chairs up, register counted, and closed. Lily Park sat on the counter with a cup of tea that had gone cold and watched Zoe move through the closing routine with the same unhurried precision as every other evening. Zoe, Lily said. Can I ask you something? You can ask. Lily thought about how to phrase it. She thought about the 8 months she'd worked alongside this person, about the gas valve and the 5 drinks carried in 2 hands, and the way Zoe's eyes swept a room when the door opened. She thought about Rex's bow. She thought about Drake's voice saying 23 years old and the way the coffee shop had held that sentence. She said, why are you here? You could do anything. Like, genuinely, anything. Why a coffee shop in Ridgecrest? The cleaning cloth moved across the machine surface. The machine surfaces caught the last of the overhead light. Where should I be? Zoe said. I don't know. Something bigger. Something that, the things you did. I did those things, Zoe said, because they needed doing, and I was able to do them, and not doing them meant people I cared about didn't come home. She folded the cloth with the care she gave everything. She set it down. She looked at Lily, the full quality of her attention, direct and clear, the kind of look Lily had always found slightly overwhelming, like standing too close to something large and quiet. 6 years of doing things because they needed doing, and because I was good at them, and because the alternative was unacceptable. 3 deployments. 19 dogs. People I trained who came back, and some I knew who didn't. She was quiet for a moment. And then I was 26, and I had the choice that most people don't get, and I chose this. Coffee, Lily said. I like the smell of it, Zoe said, without apology. I like the physics of a good extraction. I like that when I make it right, someone has a better morning. I like that it's mine, all the way through. I chose the shop, the town, the hours. I chose to be somewhere small and real and mine. She picked up her jacket from its hook. That's allowed to be enough. Lily thought about that. Does it bother you? She said. What she said this morning. Zoe's expression was quiet and almost unreadable for a moment. Then something moved through it. Not anger, not hurt, but something clear and settled. She said I was just a stupid kid, Zoe said. I was training military working dogs for active combat operations at the age of 20. I have been, in my life, a lot of things. She looked at Lily. Stupid kid isn't one of them. The laugh that came out of Lily was sudden and genuine and slightly startled. The laugh of someone who has been holding tension for a long time without knowing it, and has just been relieved of it. Zoe smiled. It was a small smile, and it was real, and it reached the lines at the corners of her eyes in the way that real smiles do, and Lily thought, there she is. For just a moment. There she actually is. Go home, Zoe said. You were good today. You were. I was a barista today, Zoe said. Same as every day. She turned off the last light. Wednesday morning. 5:52 a.m. The back door of Altitude Brews opened. The motion sensor light clicked on. The room was exactly as she'd left it. Clean, ordered, smelling of the previous day's coffee in the way that good coffee shops always did. The scent worked so deep into the wood and stone that it had become part of the architecture. Zoe started the machine. She calibrated the grinders. She measured the first dose on the scale, checked the reading, adjusted 0.2 of a gram. She put the thermometer in the milk fridge. She unlocked the front door at 6:01, turned the sign, and stood for a moment looking out through the glass at the October street, empty and clean in the early light, with the mountains coming clear against the sky as the darkness thinned. She made herself a coffee. She stood at the window and drank it. The mountains were very clear this morning. By 7 o'clock, the first regulars arrived. By 8 o'clock, the line had reached the door. Lily came in at 8:15, slightly breathless, with the phone-checked look of someone who had been living in a notification stream since she woke. For Million, she said, tying her apron. Good morning, Lily. For a million views, Zoe. Do you want to discuss that? Or do you want to take the line? Lily looked at the line. The line, she said. Good call. At 9:15, a young man came in and stood in the queue. He was 25 or 26, built with the particular proportions of someone who spent significant time carrying weight, wearing civilian clothes that fit across the shoulders with a familiar precision. He had the haircut. He had the eyes, that specific quality of eyes that had been trained, through repetition and necessity, to be always taking something in. He stepped to the counter when his turn came. He looked at Zoe. His body made a small, aborted movement, an instinct that fired and was caught in the same half-second, the reflex overriding itself through an act of will that was visible if you knew what you were looking for. He'd almost saluted. He'd stopped himself. He stood there now, looking at her directly and without the reflex, measuring something against something. Whatever he'd heard about her against the 5'2" woman in the green apron in the mountain town coffee shop, and finding the measurement, quietly, accurate. What can I get you? Zoe said. A beat. Medium drip, please. Name. A longer beat. The calculation visible in the small pause. What name? Here, in this context, in this morning. Then the decision. The same decision that the context itself was an argument for, that the shop and the town and the woman in the apron were a sustained argument for, that the context here was simple and chosen and enough. Jake, he said. Jake. Medium drip. She poured it. Clean, hot, correct. She slid it across the counter. He picked it up. He stood there for a moment with the cup in his hands and the look of someone who has something to say, who has, maybe, been composing it since before he walked in, who has thought about what you say to someone when the things you know about them exceed what the situation provides space for. She looked at him. Just a coffee today, she said. He held her eyes for a moment. Then he nodded. Once, with the specific quality of a nod that means I understand, and I understand what you're not saying, and I respect it, and turned and found a table near the window. He sat. He looked out at the mountains. He exhaled. Behind the bar, Zoe Chun turned back to the espresso machine. The morning light came through the west window at a low October angle, catching the pale scar on her left forearm just below the wrist, barely visible, permanent, the specific color of something healed completely a long time ago. She set the portafilter. She pressed the button. The machine began.